Well, I said after qualifying yesterday when Oscar Piastri qualified P2 behind Charles Leclerc that Oscar happily combines something of the early turn-in short corner technique of Charles Leclerc and in addition the wonderful power application and feel for linear power application that Sergio Perez has. He's got both of those qualities, and in race day when it all came down to the variables, when it all came down to mixing and matching between two compounds, the track surface changing and a lot of other stuff besides, leaves on the track, dust, looking into the sun, all of that added up to Oscar Piastri being in perfect shape to maximise the performance of his McLaren-Mercedes. What a superb drive by Oscar to win the Baku Grand Prix. He was behind Charles Leclerc in the first phase of the race, off the line. Very good P2 behind Charles. Everybody starting, of the top runners starting on the mediums. We'll get on to Lando and a few others starting on the hard nearer the back of the grid later on. But they're all on the medium tyre, and Oscar Piastri looking pretty good behind Charles Leclerc. But you're thinking, eventually Charles is going to get the tyre management. He's going to start to pull away, and this is probably going to be his Grand Prix. But it all changed when they switched to hard compound tyres. And here's an example of where the bigger sweet spot of the McLaren still counts to that of the Ferrari, which is definitely more precise in the way you've got to set the car up. For the medium, for the hard, for less downforce, for more downforce. The McLaren definitely has a bigger sweet spot. And on the hard tyre, Charles Leclerc found it much more difficult to manage the back end of the car, to manage the rear of the car. Not the area of the car that he's normally in trouble with, but certainly not in the Sergio Perez class in that area, and certainly not in the Oscar Piastri class, as it turned out, because Oscar, with that slightly bigger sweet spot and also using the tyres really well, got an early jump on Leclerc in that second phase on the hard tyre in DRS and got in front of him. And you thought at this point, again, maybe you thought Charles Leclerc's just going to sit there, wait for the McLaren to overuse its tyres, as it did at Monza, and then he'll breeze through to win again. And it was a bit of a stalemate for a while. Nobody really knew what was going to go on. Charles put through a few radio messages from time to time saying it looks as if Oscar's starting to struggle, and if he's not struggling, they've got more downforce than us, things like that. Ferrari putting out comments to Charles Leclerc like, keep at it, Charles, keep at it, this is a great fight. Not really what Charles Leclerc would want to hear. What he would want to hear is, we've got the race in hand, just sit there, for sure the McLaren's tyres are going to go off. But of course, no one was going to make that prediction. And on this occasion, the tyres of the McLaren didn't go off appreciably. Yeah, Oscar started to lose the rears towards the end of the race, but it wasn't enough to cause any sort of trouble for him, particularly as Charles Leclerc was in the same problem. Oscar also had a little bit of trouble with the fronts, but he managed all that. He managed it beautifully because he has that amazing touch, that lovely, soft, supple touch that is a very rare quality in Formula One, that's for sure. Lando Norris has it, but Lando has a different way of going into corners. And Oscar just managed the car beautifully, first of all under pressure from Charles Leclerc halfway through the hard tyre second phase of the race. And then when things really started to get tight and forever Charles was in the DRS and pulling to the left, Oscar would move to the left and then do one of his moves to the right at the last minute to get a good exit out of turn one. Lap after lap after lap, Charles was there but could do nothing about it. And then came the traffic. It wasn't appreciably difficult, but Oscar definitely had the right bit of road to be on if you're leading the pack. And so the race wore on. Oscar Piastri absolutely faultless. Some lovely power slides, you could call them that, up on the curb. There was one moment we saw on TV when both he and Charles were both in big oversteer moments over the curb. Coming out of, I think, 16. And it was interesting, they cut away, but you could just see a little bit of Sergio Perez, who was beautifully hanging on to both of them. We'll get on to him in a bit, but beautifully hanging on to both of them. And no power slide at all from Sergio. Absolutely perfect. But of course, that doesn't warrant any TV time because it's boring. He's just doing it perfectly. The other two, when they got opposite lock, yeah, that's when we want to see it. And then it all dissolved at the end, with Oscar starting to pull away a little bit from Charles in increasing trouble with tyre wear. And the thought occurred that he had been sitting so close to Oscar Piastri for so long that was going to have an effect on his tyres. It was probably going to have an effect on the performance of the engine as well. But he was there for a long, long time. There was maybe a 10-lap moment in the middle of the race when Charles could have maybe given a little bit more free air behind him, but he didn't want to do that. He didn't want to give Oscar any respite. He wanted to sustain the pressure. He's a racer as much as Oscar Piastri is. And then, of course, at the end, it all fizzled out because they were slowing one another down towards the end. There's no doubt about that. And Sergio Perez was all over them in the Red Bull Honda, and catching them as a result was Carlos Sainz. He'd driven a very good but lonely race in the other Ferrari, dropped away quite a lot on the medium tyres early on full tanks, as he often does, but came back into it big time towards the end of the race on the hard tyres. And he'd put his tyres through much less, so he was in better shape. He had more grip, for example, than Charles Leclerc, and was consistently lapping quicker. And so they were bunched up, 4 of them over the last 4 or 5 laps, fighting for the lead. The problem was that Sergio Perez was in very good shape now, and he got a good DRS run on Charles Leclerc towards the end. And it seemed inconceivable that after all of this that Charles wasn't going to finish at least second. But there was Sergio alongside him, ahead of him, but Charles just managed to keep the corner and edged Perez wide coming out of turn 1, which gave Carlos Sainz the slot to get inside Sergio Perez and take P3. So now it was Ferrari 2-3, Oscar Piastri already now 2 seconds in front with just a few laps to go. And as they came out of turn 2, it's a very, very narrow piece of road. It's a straight, it's a DRS straight. It's a very narrow piece of road, however. And Carlos was in the middle of the road. Sergio Perez had gone to the inside. Carlos had run a little bit wide coming out of turn 2, so he'd got the inside run. But he was by no means in great shape for the next corner. But he was on the left, Carlos was on the right. And they just tangled. Carlos moved a fraction to the left. I think Sergio moved a fraction to the right as well, but there was nothing really major there. But they just wheels interlocked, and suddenly Carlos's Ferrari turned sharp left and forced Sergio into the wall. A sad ending of the race for Sergio Perez, who'd driven really well. For Carlos Sainz, who'd driven really well. And of course that elevated a lot of other drivers up into better positions. So after that, it was Charles Leclerc under virtual safety car conditions, nothing he could do, of course. Not that he could have done anything anyway, and Oscar Piastri winning the Baku Grand Prix for McLaren-Mercedes. And I think that puts Monza into perspective, because as I've said several times, I think McLaren should have won Monza. And the reason they abused their tyres as much as they did, it was because Lando and Oscar were racing, particularly after the skirmishes that had happened on the first lap. They were racing one another hard and overusing the tyres, and that's how Charles Leclerc was able to just back away a little and win that race on a one-stop strategy. There's no doubt that Charles Leclerc, looking at it now, how good the McLaren is, no doubt that Charles Leclerc should take a bigger bow even for the pole he got in Baku, because he over-delivered really on what that Ferrari could do. What it could certainly do on the hard tyres over a full race distance, or 2/3 of the race distance, that's for sure. And McLaren can look back at this race and say, yeah, we got it right. But in terms of the championship, I mean, maybe they're not thinking of the Drivers' Championship in terms of Lando Norris, but in terms of what Lando Norris could have done today, it was a disappointing day for McLaren. There was a lot of shouting and screaming, and Lando, yeah, give it everything you got. This was to take what eventually would have been 4th place from Max Verstappen. We're talking about a couple of points differences here, nothing to shout home about. And by any standards, of course, Lando Norris drove a beautiful race today from where he was on the grid. They put him on the hard tyre, and we know how good the McLaren was on the hard tyre. Look what Oscar was able to do under pressure from Charles Leclerc. And Lando drove through the field, drove really well, and gave himself a very short final stint on a new set of mediums and got that position from Max Verstappen. But had McLaren not brought both drivers in Q1, as I said yesterday, towards the end of Q1 with 5 minutes to go, and just let Lando stay out, just get a time in to get him into Q2, then of course he would have got into Q3. Of course he probably would have qualified top 3 or 4, and Lando Norris would have been in very good shape. If not to win this race, maybe he wouldn't have beaten Oscar today, but he certainly would have got major points. So it was a disappointing day from McLaren's point of view, if they're really honest about it from a Lando Norris perspective. And on top of all that, Lando did a really good job of helping Oscar at a critical stage of the race. After they'd come out on the hard tyres, after their one and only pit stops, Lando found himself ahead on the road of Sergio Perez. And the radio message came out. It's a fairly logical thing, I suppose, with, if possible, try and hold Perez up as much as you can in Sector 2. Sector 2, because that's where Perez was particularly strong, and also because not much chance of holding him up in Sector 3 because of DRS. And he did that for a couple of laps, and he cost Perez quite a lot of time. And McLaren said later that's what made the difference for Oscar Piastri. I'm not sure that's the case, because I think once he'd got past Lando and once the two leaders started to struggle a little bit with tyres and slowed one another down, Sergio Perez was able to not catch them quite easily, but he was able to catch them remorselessly, let's put it that way. And he was up there where he probably would have been had he not been held up by Lando. And it was enough for Sergio to get on the radio to say, he's holding me up. Can you guys see this? Made one think of Abu Dhabi 21 when he did a good job of holding up Lewis Hamilton, but that's another matter. And nothing wrong with any of that. All I'm saying is that Lando, team player, gave Oscar the win in Hungary, helped McLaren win today in McLaren's eyes in Baku today. And yeah, he drove a good race, drove a very good race, set fastest lap. I think right at the end under virtual safety car, just before that accident, Max Verstappen had enough margin over Fernando Alonso to duck in for a set of softs and try to get fastest lap and mitigate the loss of 1 or 2 points in the championship. But from Max's point of view, let's talk about Max Verstappen then, because he made quite a good start. He got in front of George Russell at the start. And just very good positioning of the car out of turn 1, turn 2, did a very good job. But then very quickly, after about 4 laps, it was pretty clear that his tyres were already starting to go away. And then the radio messages began. I've got no brakes. The back end's bouncing all over the place. I can't drive this car. I can't feel this car. And it was no better. In fact, it was probably even worse on hard tyres. And he fell away. His race, I mean, he was struggling to get past from many laps Alex Albon in the Williams Mercedes, who drove really well, not detracting from Alex at all, but Max Verstappen should be able to breeze past this guy if Alex is on old tyres and Max is on new tyres, and he's just stuck there, and he couldn't get past Lando Norris either. So that was Max's race gone, really. The only thing he could do, I mean, there was no way he could defend against Lando Norris. It wasn't even a race. I'm surprised that they got quite excited about that, because it was very clear, the millisecond that it was obvious when Max couldn't get past Lando, that Lando was obviously going to be able to make a pit stop onto new mediums and finish ahead of him on the ground. But in terms of Max's point of view, if he's thinking of the championship, which he's probably not, he probably finds the championship a bit boring now, thinking about points, wants to win every race like everybody else. From his point of view, I suppose, if you want to look at it from point of view, it was another race where there was a lot of damage limitation and not much dent was made in his championship lead. Well, virtually no dent was made, even though he had another terrible race. So the other point, of course, is how good a race Sergio Perez drove in that car. Now, is that the difference around Baku between Sergio, who always goes well at Baku, and Max Verstappen, who doesn't go that well at Baku? I don't think it is. I think there were some things wrong on Max's car that were quite clearly there on Friday and Saturday, particularly the bouncing around the rear, particularly a brake issue. Not the first time he complained about that. George Russell also talking about brakes around Baku as well. And Sergio just had a really good run, a really good day. Very unfortunate end, not his fault at all. But he's put that out there now, and Sergio Perez is back. There's no doubt about that. Driving like the old Sergio Perez. Big thanks to Rob Wilson for that. But it's odd that Max is having such a really bad run at the moment, and he's just so uncompetitive with his major rivals, and to some extent even with his non-major rivals. I mean, he's struggling to be as quick as Fernando Alonso at various stages of the race. Not that Fernando wasn't good today, he was. He's extremely good. He got absolute maximum from the Aston Martin, no doubt about that, to finish in P6. But at the end of the day, Max Verstappen, the one we know from Red Bull, is normally a billion miles away in the sunset. And that isn't happening at the moment. And it's strange. If you take the 30,000 foot view, you could say, wow, ever since the Adrian Newey departure news, Red Bull seemed to have collapsed. Well, it's very easy to say that. I've just said it. But yeah, I think a lot of it does underline how good Adrian is, and certainly was in his Red Bull days, in the field, at the racetrack, in terms of setup, possibly in knowing how Max wants the car set up as well. He's very, very good at that. We all talk about him as an aerodynamicist, as a chief designer, but he's also a really, really good race engineer. And that appears to be what Red Bull are lacking at the moment. But having said that, Sergio Perez had a pretty good race car today. And the question is, would Max have driven the same race as Perez in Perez's car? Would he have done a better job than Perez in Perez's car? It's an unanswerable question. I think there's no doubt that Max had problems, but equally I think Perez should get a lot of praise for his ability to look after the rears and the way he does drive in such a linear way on corners that really suit him, like those 90-degree corners in Baku. They're really, really good corners for Perez. As I record this, messages just come in from the FIA saying McLaren Formula One team are being summoned to report to the stewards, alleged breach of Article 34.13 of the regulations, team personnel and equipment in the pit lane during the race. Even if they're guilty, it doesn't sound as if it's going to be a massive problem. Although, of course, if it is a 10-second penalty or something like that, then the win will go to Charles Leclerc. So we'll watch this space with interest, of course. But just quickly going through the other results. George Russell, very good drive by George. As I say, passed by Max Verstappen early on, then repassed Max when they got onto the hard tyres and finished what eventually was third with the elimination of Perez and Carlos Sainz. George saying, when he was in the virtual safety car conditions, saying what a shunt that was. He, on that bit of straight, couldn't see a thing. He was just absolutely blind, straight into the sun. And on the last lap, he was trying to get as much rubber as he could onto the tyres, just for a weight thing, obviously. But he said he couldn't find any rubber. I can only find leaves, he said in a very good BBC commentary type voice. Lando Norris, P4, very good drive. I mean, there'll be lots of exultation about that. You know, Oscar first, Lando fourth from where he was on the grid. What a great drive. But what a shame is what I say, because Lando should have started front row, second row, and he should have been right up there from the start of the race. Max was fifth, Fernando Alonso sixth, Alex Albon very good seventh for Williams Mercedes, quicker weekend, and Franco Colapinto eighth, absolutely brilliant in the other Williams. I think in many ways he should have got driver of the day. I thought he was absolutely superb, and he and Oliver Burman held off Lewis Hamilton for about, 20-25 laps. Oliver Burman particularly being quite aggressive with Lewis, which is kind of a cool thing, isn't it? You've got this young Englishman and there's Sir Lewis Hamilton behind you, and just edge him into the pit wall and keep the lead. Incredible. Anyway, for all that, Lewis finished ninth. Very difficult day from Lewis starting from the pit lane. The car was not good at all. The team apologising like crazy to Lewis on the slowdown laps. Oliver scored points as well. He and Franco Colapinto both scored points. Excellent result. Nico Hülkenberg 11th in the other Haas Ferrari. Bit of a shame for him right at the end of the race. And Pierre Gasly and Daniel Ricciardo after that. But in the meantime, thanks for watching. Thanks for watching too on our new Brazilian channel in Portuguese. And if you're watching this in Spanish and enjoying it, please tell your mates about it, and we're going to try and do this with every major video that we do. Hope you've enjoyed it as well. A big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, and to Track Ninja. I'm off to Singapore, of course. It is a double header, so the next videos I'll be doing will look a little bit more ropey because I won't be in the comfort of the studio here. I'll be in my hotel room probably. Hopefully the internet will be okay. Might be more difficult to do the special language editions from there. Got to say that in advance, but anyway, I'm sure you'll all understand that. Anyway, see you soon from Singapore. Take care.